The sun was already high when Hannah tightened the reins and nudged her tired mare toward the ranch house. Sweat rolled down her temple, mingling with the dust clinging to her skin. It was another long morning fixing broken fence lines, and she still had a full day's work ahead. The place had been her father's pride, but since his passing 2 winters ago, the land seemed heavier on her shoulders with each passing season. Cattle numbers were down, the barn roof leaked when it rained, and every loose fence post felt like a reminder that the ranch and she were running out of time. Dusty Creek was a small town, the kind where nothing went unnoticed, and everyone had an opinion. Most of those opinions had been voiced to Hannah at least twice. Sell the land, girl. You can't manage it alone. She never said aloud, but sometimes she wondered if they were right. Still, every morning, she got up before sunrise, laced her boots, and worked until her arms ached. The ranch was more than land. It was the last piece of her father she had left. That afternoon, while Hannah was carrying a bucket of nails toward the corral, she noticed movement along the main road. A man on foot, tall and lean, approached with a slow, deliberate stride. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, shadowing most of his face, and his clothes, worn jeans, dusty boots, and a faded shirt, spoke of long miles traveled. He carried a bedroll strapped across his back, and there was a guarded stillness about him that made him seem almost part of the land itself. When he reached the fence line, he tipped his hat just enough to meet her eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said in a voice low and calm. "Name's Cole. I'm passing through looking for a few days' work if you got any needs." Hannah studied him, unsure. She'd heard about drifters before, men with no roots, no past they talk about, and no plans to stay. Sometimes they were harmless. Sometimes they weren't. And in a town like Dusty Creek, strangers were more often trouble than blessing. "I'm not looking to take anyone on," she replied, shifting the bucket in her hands. Behind her, a wagon rattled by on the road toward town, and she caught sight of Mrs. Turner leaning out to get a better look at the newcomer. By the time the wagon rolled past, she knew the gossip wheel would already be turning. A lone drifter stopping at Hannah Walker's ranch? By supper, the whole town would be chewing on it like a bone. Cole didn't press her. "Understood," he said, giving a small nod as if he expected her answer. But something in his tone, matter of fact, without a hint of begging, made her hesitate. The barn roof was still leaking, the south fence was falling apart, and she could use another set of hands, even if just for a short while. "You any good with tools?" she asked finally. His lips quirked, almost a smile. "Better than most." By the time she agreed to let him stay on for a few days' work and offer the small bunkhouse out back, a couple of townsfolk had already slowed their horses to get a look at the scene. She could practically hear the whispers. Hannah Walker, alone on the ranch, taking in some stranger nobody knows. That evening, over a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Hannah tried to learn more about her new hand. He didn't say much, just that he'd worked on ranches in Texas, fixed fences in New Mexico, and once spent a winter driving cattle north. Every detail was sparse, given without flourish. When she asked why he'd left his last place, he simply said, "Time to move on," and changed the subject. The silence between them wasn't exactly comfortable, but it wasn't cold either. She found herself watching the way he carried himself, like a man who knew hard work but kept his troubles to himself. And though she didn't know why, she decided she'd give him the benefit of the doubt. Still, as she lay in bed that night, she could almost hear the town's voices swirling in her head. Stories about fights Cole had supposedly been in, debts he might have left behind, and a mysterious disappearance linked to his name. She didn't know which of those were true, maybe none of them. But in Dusty Creek, rumor had a way of sounding like fact. Morning came early. Cole was already outside, hammer in hand, working on the warped barn door without being asked. Hannah watched him for a moment from the porch, the sunrise painting the sky behind him in streaks of gold and rose. Maybe she was making a mistake. Or maybe, just maybe, the stranger no one trusted might turn out to be the help she'd been praying for. By midweek, the news had spread through Dusty Creek faster than wildfire in the summer drought. Hannah Walker had taken in a stranger. She could feel the stares whenever she rode into town for supplies. Women paused mid-conversation, their eyes flicking toward her, before leaning to whisper into each other's ears. Men leaned on fence posts, chewing tobacco and narrowing their eyes at the mention of coal. In a town where everyone knew everyone, letting an unknown man stay on her land was like dropping a fox into the henhouse. Hannah tried to ignore it. She told herself it didn't matter what they thought, but the weight of their judgment pressed down just the same. She didn't need their approval. She needed help, and Cole was proving himself every day. Still, the whispers rode on the wind, finding her wherever she went. Back at the ranch, Cole was as steady as the rising sun. He didn't waste words, but when he spoke, it was to the point and without hesitation. He handled the horses with an easy confidence, his quiet manner calming even the most skittish mare. When a section of south fence collapsed during the night, he had it standing straighter than before by mid-morning. His hands were rough and weathered, but there was a precision to his work that spoke of experience. Hannah caught herself watching him sometimes, wondering where he'd learned such skill. His past remained locked away, as if each answer to her casual questions was a door closed with a firm click. But he never shirked, never complained. If anything, he seemed to take quiet pride in making himself useful. The following Saturday, she rode into town for a new set of nails and a sack of feed. As she tied her horse outside the general store, the blacksmith, Jed Miller, called to her from his workshop. "Hannah," he said, wiping his hands on a rag as she approached. "A word, if you don't mind." She stepped closer, noting the furrow in his brow. "What is it, Jed?" He leaned in, lowering his voice. "That drifter you got. Cole. Folks are saying he's trouble. I ain't one for gossip, but I heard a story or two that don't sit right. You might want to watch your back." Hannah straightened, irritation prickling under her skin. "And what story would that be?" Jed hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "Couple years back, there was a ranch up north lost a good bit of money in stock. Some say Cole was there before it happened, then vanished overnight. Could be nothing, but..." He let the words hang. "Could be just another story Dusty Creek likes to tell," she said tightly, before turning away. Still, his warning clung to her thoughts like burrs on her hem. That evening, she returned home to find Cole working alone near the barn. The sun was dipping low, casting the yard in long shadows. He'd set aside a pile of tools she didn't recognize, along with scraps that would cut with surprising precision. "What's it you're working on?" she asked, stepping closer. He paused, glancing at the half-formed structure on the workbench. "Just something to keep my hands busy after chores." She studied it. A curved piece of sanded oak, smooth so fine it looked like it had been polished for weeks. Whatever it wasn't part of the ranch repairs. But he offered no further explanation, and she didn't press. Over the next few days, Hannah noticed the same pattern. After the day's work was done, Cole would spend an hour or two in the barn, measuring, sawing, and fitting pieces together. Sometimes he covered the work with an old tarp when she approached, as though it were a surprise. The townsfolk's whispers and Jed's warning buzzed in her head, but when she saw Cole lifting a newborn calf to his feet during a chilly morning, his voice low and steady as he encouraged it to nurse, the image didn't match the rumors. If he was hiding something, it didn't seem like the sort of secret that could hurt her, at least not yet. But Dusty Creek had a long memory, and if Cole's past really was tangled with trouble, she knew it wouldn't stay hidden for long. Out here, the wind carried more than dust. It carried the truth, whether you wanted to hear it or not. The first frost of autumn left a silver sheen across the ranch at dawn, and Hannah stepped out onto the porch with a mug of coffee, watching her breath curl into the cold morning air. Cole was already outside, tightening the girth on his saddle. He rose earlier than she did most days, and though she didn't say it aloud, she found herself relying on his quiet presence more than she'd expected. Today, she planned to test him, to see if his work matched the trust she was slowly, cautiously extending. "South Pasture's got a stretch of fence down," she told him as he mounted up. "It runs into the rocky slope, so it's not an easy fix. Think you can handle it?" He gave her a single nod, eyes steady beneath the brim of his hat. "I'll take care of it. No questions, no complaints." By mid-morning, Hannah rode out to check on him. half expecting to find him still struggling with a tangle of wire and posts. Instead, she stopped short. Cole had already repaired more than half the length. The wire stretched tight and even, the posts driven deep into the stubborn earth. His hands moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice, each twist of the pliers deliberate and firm. When he spotted her, he didn't puff up or brag, just tipped his hat and said, "Almost done." She rode away with a strange warmth in her chest. Maybe the whispers in town were nothing more than wind through dry grass. That afternoon, the cattle in the north pen grew restless. One bull in particular, mean as a cornered snake, had been testing the fence for days. When Hannah went to shift the herd, the bull charged, snorting and tossing its head. She braced herself for a fight, but Cole stepped in with calm, firm movements, steering the animal away without raising his voice. The bull backed down like a spoiled child facing a patient father. By the time evening rolled in, Hannah was in no mood to cook, but it felt wrong to leave the day without acknowledgement. She set out a simple meal, bread, beans, and salted pork, and called Cole in from the yard. He hesitated at the door, wiping his boots before stepping inside. At the table, he kept his elbows close, his voice low, his "thank you, ma'am" soft but sincere. Conversation didn't come easy between them, but there was no edge to the silence, only a quiet steadiness. She found herself noticing the small courtesies, how he waited for her to take the first bite, how he didn't reach for more until she was done, how he never interrupted when she spoke. In a world full of men who talked too loud and too often, his restraint was different. After dinner, Cole excused himself, heading for the barn. Hannah assumed he was tending to the tools or checking the horses, but when she passed by later on her way to the well, she heard the faint rasp of a saw and the steady rhythm of a hammer. The barn doors were half closed, a warm lantern glow spilling into the yard. Inside, Cole stood at the workbench, sleeves rolled to the elbow, working a smooth curve into a piece of wood. Around him lay neatly arranged tools and a collection of cut planks. Whatever he was building, it wasn't part of the day's chores, and from her angle, she couldn't see enough to make sense of it. He didn't notice her lingering, and she didn't call out. Instead, she stepped quietly away, the cool night air wrapping around her as she walked back toward the house. Trust was a fragile thing, and though Cole had earned a measure of it today, there were still locked doors between them. She'd given him more responsibility, and he hadn't let her down, but she couldn't shake the feeling that part of him was still fenced off, like land he wasn't ready to let anyone cross. And out here, Hannah knew some boundaries were made of more than barbed wire. The wind that morning carried more than dust through Dusty Creek. It carried unease. Hannah felt it the moment she stepped into town for supplies. The blacksmith, usually quick with a joke, barely nodded at her. Mrs. Carter from the general store gave her a tight smile, but kept glancing toward the street as if expecting trouble. That trouble arrived in the form of a tall man on a bay gelding, his coat long and weathered from miles on the trail. He tied his horse outside the saloon and began asking questions. Questions with Cole's name in them. Quiet fella? Lean with dark hair? Wears his hat low. Hannah overheard him say to the barkeep. By the time she left the store, the man's presence had already rippled through the town. Whispers followed her to the hitching post. She heard fragments, debt collector, fight in Abilene, went missing after the fire. None of it sat right with her, but the weight of other people's fear had a way of seeping in like rain through a loose roof. When she returned to the ranch, Cole was mending a gate by the corral. He straightened when he saw her face, reading the tension there before she spoke. "There's a man in town asking about you," she said, keeping her tone even. Folks seemed spooked. Cole's jaw tightened, the hammer in his hand pausing mid-swing. Did he give a name? She shook her head. Didn't ask. For a long moment, he stared past her at the horizon, as if weighing something only he could see. Finally, he set the hammer down and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Some things," he said quietly, "ain't worth talking about yet." His voice carried no anger, but there was a finality in it that told her she wouldn't get more. Not today. Hannah wanted to press, but there was a look in his eyes she'd never seen before, a mix of warning and weariness. She let it drop, though unease settled in her chest like a stone. By late afternoon, dark clouds began piling in from the west, heavy and bruised-looking. The wind picked up, rattling loose shutters and driving the scent of rain across the fields. Cole worked through the evening as if the storm didn't bother him. When lightning cracked in the distance, Hannah assumed he'd come inside. Instead, she spotted the lantern glow from the barn, swaying faintly in the gusts. She hesitated at the window, watching him move in the shadows. His hands were sure, his focus absolute, even as the wind howled around the building. Whatever he was making in there, it was important enough to keep him out in weather most folks would run from. Rain finally came hard and fast, drumming on the roof like 1,000 small fists. Hannah thought about going to the barn, maybe demanding to know what he was doing. But something in her, a mix of caution and strange respect, kept her inside. She banked the fire and listened to the storm instead, wondering who that stranger was and why Cole looked like a man with ghosts riding hard on his heels. The storm had rolled through the night before, leaving the ranch soaked and smelling of wet earth. Puddles dotted the yard. The fields glistened under a pale morning sun, and the air still carried the restless energy of rain. Hannah was halfway to the pasture when she heard a frantic bleating, sharp, desperate, and coming from the low ditch beyond the fence line. She broke into a run, mud sucking at her boots, and found the source, a young calf, belly deep in thick brown muck, legs flailing as it tried to scramble free. The poor thing was coated nose to tail in mud, eyes wide with panic. Hannah's heart kicked hard. That ditch could pull a grown man under in the wrong spot, and the calf was exhausting itself fast. Before she could think of how to get it out, hoofbeats pounded up behind her. Cole reined in hard, swung down from his horse in one motion, and waded straight into the muck without hesitation. "Keep hold of the fence," he called over his shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "Ground soft. Don't come in after me." Hannah gripped the post, rainwater from last night still dripping down its rough grain, and watched as Cole slogged toward the calf. Mud sucked at his legs, but he moved with steady, deliberate steps. Reaching the calf, he looped a rope around its chest, murmuring low and even to keep it calm. Then, bracing himself, he hauled in short, powerful pulls until the calf stumbled free onto solid ground. The animal wobbled, shook itself, and let out a bewildered bawl before trotting toward the rest of the herd. Cole stayed in the ditch a moment longer, catching his breath, then climbed out, mud streaking his clothes and face. "Guess that one owes you its life," Hannah said, trying to master relief in her voice with a small smile. He shrugged, wiping a streak of dirt from his cheek. "Just doing the job." But Hannah felt something shift inside her, not a grand revelation, but a small, sure piece of proof that the man folks feared might not match the man in front of her. Later that afternoon, they worked side by side repairing a stretch of fence the storm had damaged. Hannah had always fought with the wire, wrestling it into place until her hands ached. Cole noticed, took the pliers from her, and with a quiet efficiency showed her how to loop and twist the wire in half the time. "Like dancing with it instead of fighting it," he said, handing the pliers back. She tried his method, and to her surprise, it worked. The tension in her arms eased, and the job went faster. "Guess I've been making it harder than it needs to be," she admitted. "Most folks do," Cole replied, giving her a rare, fleeting grin before turning back to the posts. That evening, after the tools were put away, Hannah went to check the barn. Cole's horse was in its stall, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut lumber. Her gaze landed on a growing pile of wood, neatly stacked, alongside tools she didn't recognize from her own collection. In the corner, partially hidden under a canvas tarp, something large was taking shape. Panels of sanded boards, curved edges, and what looked like the beginnings of a frame. It was too big for furniture, too precise for a simple repair. Before she could study it further, Cole walked in carrying a coil of rope. "Need something?" he asked, his tone unreadable. "No," she said quickly, stepping back, "just checking the stalls." Word traveled fast in Dusty Creek, and by the next market day, the whispers were running wild. Hannah overheard 2 women near the feed store say they'd heard Cole was building a wagon big enough to haul stolen goods, planning to disappear before anyone could stop him. Another claimed she'd seen him buying nails and iron fittings, the kind you'd need for long hauling. By the time Hannah returned home, her mind was a tangle of doubt and curiosity. That night, lying in bed, she kept thinking about the shape under the tarp, though it stacked so carefully, and the quiet way Cole went about his work. Whatever he was building, he hadn't offered an explanation, and she hadn't found the courage to ask. The late summer sun beat down on the dusty main street of Dusty Creek as Hannah guided her small herd toward the auction pens. The market was already alive with the noise of cattle, merchants shouting their bids, and wagons rattling over the uneven ground. It had been a rough season, but she hoped today's sale would fetch enough to cover feed and the next payment on the ranch. She was tightening the rope on the lead steer when a shadow fell over her. Jeb Turner, thick-necked, broad-bellied, and wearing a smirk that always made her skin crawl, leaned against the fence. His hat was tipped back, revealing eyes that measured her like she was another item on the auction block. "Shame, Hannah," Jeb drawled. "You running this place alone. Land like yours needs a man who can take care of it. Sell to me now, and you'll save yourself a heap of trouble." "I'm not selling, Jeb," she said flatly, not bothering to look up from the knot she was tying. He chuckled low, the kind of sound that made it clear he enjoyed pushing her buttons. "Not yet, maybe, but when that drifter of yours runs off, and you'll wish you had. Can't trust a man with no roots." Before Hannah could answer, the sound of boots on packed dirt came from behind her. Cole stepped forward, silent but solid, his gaze fixed on Jeb. He wasn't loud, but his voice carried enough weight to cut through the auction noise. "She said she's not selling," Cole said. Jeb's eyes narrowed. "You got something to say to me, boy?" Cole didn't flinch. "Just making sure you heard her the first time." A few ranchers nearby slowed their work to watch. Whispers began, and Hannah could feel the shift in the air, the kind of tension that meant tomorrow's gossip was already writing itself. Jeb pushed off the fence and stepped closer, his bulk a wall between Cole and Hannah. "Careful, stranger. Folks might start thinking you're playing the hero." Cole's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "I'm just here to make sure people treat her with respect." That single sentence was enough to light the fuse. By the time Jeb stalked away, muttering under his breath, half the market was buzzing. Some nodded at Cole with approval. Others smirked like they already knew how this story would end. The rest of the auction passed in a haze for Hannah. She sold her cattle for a fair price, but the weight of the stairs and the overheard fragments, that drifter's trouble. She's letting him run her place now. Stayed with her all the way home. At the gate, Cole handed her the sales ledger without a word. His expression was unreadable, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. "Thanks," she said quietly. He just tipped his hat and headed for the barn. That night, the ranch was quiet except for the distant creak of wood and the muted thud of a hammer. Hannah couldn't sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the look in Jeb's eyes, heard his warning, and felt the shift in the townsfolk's gaze. She rose before dawn, drawn by the faint glow of lamplight spilling from the barn. Through the half-open door, she saw Cole, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow despite the cool air, bent over that same mysterious wooden frame. His movements were steady, deliberate, as if whatever he was building was the only thing keeping him tethered. He didn't notice her watching. She stayed there a long moment, the scent of fresh sawdust mixing with the smell of hay, wondering why he worked so late, why he hadn't told her, and why, despite every warning, she felt safer with him here than without. The morning came slow, wrapped in a thick mist that clung to the pasture grass. Hannah had been awake since before first light, the memory of lamplight and hammering in the barn still fixed in her mind. The mystery of Cole's late nights had gnawed at her for weeks, and today she decided she couldn't ignore it any longer. She waited until the sound of his boots faded toward the east pasture, then slipped out the back door. The barn loomed ahead, its wide doors closed but not latched. She hesitated, her palm resting against the worn wood, as if opening them would cross some invisible line. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of fresh-cut cedar and linseed oil. Shafts of sunlight poured through the high windows, catching on fine dust motes that swirled like gold in the stillness. And there, in the center of the barn, was the answer she'd been searching for. Not a wagon for stolen goods, not a chest to hide contraband. A crib. It was the most beautiful piece of craftsmanship she had ever seen. Smooth, curved edges sanded perfection. The slats evenly spaced, the headboard carved with gentle motif of wildflowers and running horses. Beside it stood a rocking chair, each armrest polished to a silky finish. Hannah stepped closer, her fingertips grazing the wood. Every inch spoke of patience, of care, of someone pouring not just skill, but heart into the work. She tried to imagine Cole bent over these pieces night after night, and the image unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. A shadow crossed the doorway. You weren't supposed to see that yet. She spun around. Cole stood there, his hat in his hand, eyes unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. "It's beautiful," she said at last. "Why?" He glanced at the crib, then back at her. "I've been saving my pay. Thought maybe I'd settle somewhere. Make a place of my own." Her chest tightened. "You were going to leave?" He hesitated, shifting his weight. "Didn't think I'd be staying here long. Folks like me, we keep moving." But he trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. Things change sometimes. The barn seemed suddenly smaller, the air heavier. Hannah searched his face, trying to read the truth between the words. "So they're for your home?" "Some days home," he corrected softly. "Didn't expect to be building him here, though." Her mind swirled with questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. Who was he building them for? Did he have someone waiting? Or was this just a dream he carried like a talisman against the weight of his past? She looked at the crib again, tracing the carved wildflowers. "You could have told me," she murmured. He gave a faint, almost apologetic smile. Some things are easier to keep quiet. Less to explain, less to lose. The words lingered between them, heavy with the things neither dared to say. She thought of Jeb's sneers, the town's whispers, the way Cole had stepped in front of her at the auction without hesitation. She thought of the quiet moments, his steady hands guiding hers when they mended wire, the way his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking. Without thinking, she said, "It doesn't have to be somewhere else." The look he gave her then was unreadable, part surprise, part something deeper, more dangerous. His hand brushed over the crib's edge, and for a moment, it felt like the barn held its breath. But then he stepped back, slipping his hat on. "We should get to work. Fences won't mend themselves." Hannah nodded, but as they walked out into the pale morning light, she knew the truth was already out in the open. The crib wasn't just wood and nails. It was a promise, one she didn't yet understand, but felt in her bones. The August sun beat down on Dusty Creek, but the heat in the air that afternoon had nothing to do with the weather. Hannah had been repairing a gate hinge when she heard the distant thunder of hooves. Not the familiar, steady gait of Cole's horse, but something faster, more urgent. She straightened, squinting toward the road, and saw a lone rider cresting the ridge. His hat brim was low, his posture sharp, his approach direct. Cole was already in the yard when the stranger rode in, dust curling around the horse's legs. The man swung down with practiced ease, his eyes locking on Cole like a predator finding its prey. "Didn't think I'd find you playing ranch hand," he said, voice dripping with mockery. Cole's shoulders tightened. "You found me. Say what you came to say, Wes." Hannah froze by the fence, hidden behind a weathered post. "Wes." The name carried a weight she didn't recognize, but the way Cole said it, low and steady, like a warning, told her this was no friendly reunion. "I came for what's mine," Wes replied, stepping closer. "You walked away, Cole. Left me holding the bag. Now you're going to make it right. I figure the cut you owe me is about every dime you've scraped together since you got here." Cole's voice was firm. "That life's done for me. You knew that when I left. That life doesn't leave you." Wes shot back. His tone sharpened. "You think building pretty little cradles in some barn makes you a changed man? You owe me, and I don't walk away empty-handed." Hannah's heart pounded. The words tumbled in her mind. Cradles. Owed. Left. She pressed a hand against the wood, steadying herself. This was the truth Cole had kept locked away. "I'm not paying you a cent," Cole said flatly. "I earned every dollar here honest, and you're not taking it." Wes's expression darkened. "Then I'll take something else. Maybe that barn you've been working in, or the lady who owns this place. She wouldn't stand much against a man like me. Cole's eyes went cold. In a heartbeat, he stepped forward, closing the space between them until they were nearly nose to nose. You keep her out of your mouth. His voice was low, dangerous, and Hannah knew in that moment that Cole would die before letting Wes harm her. The tension stretched taut as a wire. Wes gave a humorless chuckle, stepping back, but his eyes glittered with unspoken threats. You always were stubborn. Guess we'll see how long that lasts. He swung into the saddle and turned his horse toward the road, his voice carrying over his shoulder. I'll be seeing you, partner. Cole stood still until Wes was a distant blur on the horizon. Only then did he turn, and his gaze caught Hannah's. She was no longer hidden. You heard, he said quietly. She nodded, her throat tight. All of it. For a moment, neither spoke. The barn, the crib, the weeks of unspoken questions. All of it now balanced on the edge of this moment. I wasn't always the man you know, Cole admitted, his voice carrying both shame and defiance. I ran with the wrong crowd, did things I ain't proud of. One day, I decided I was done, walked away before it cost me more than it already had. Wes, he doesn't forgive easy. Hannah stepped closer. You could have told me. I thought if I kept my head down, worked hard, it'd be enough. Didn't want my past clouding what I was trying to build here. His eyes flicked toward the barn. Didn't want it clouding how you saw me. She searched his face, seeing the weight he carried, the kind that no gossip or rumor could fully explain. Cole, she said softly, people will talk no matter what you've done, but I know who you are now. And I know the man who stood between me and Wes today isn't the same man he used to be. His jaw worked, but his eyes softened. You're not afraid? I'm more afraid of what happens if you walk away again, she said simply. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if trying to decide if her words were real. Then with a faint nod, he said, Then I'll stay. And though the horizon still held the dust of Wes's departure, Hannah knew the real battle wasn't over. But for the first time, they were standing on the same side of the line. The morning after Wes's visit was quiet, but the stillness carried a weight Hannah could feel in her bones. Cole had been in the barn since before sunrise, the steady sound of his hammer echoing across the ranch. She wanted to ask what he was doing, but something in her told her to wait, to let him finish whatever this was. By mid-afternoon, he emerged, his shirt damp with sweat, sawdust clinging to his arms. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow. Inside the barn, the smell of fresh-cut pine filled the air, and in the center of the room sat the crib she had glimpsed before, now polished to a soft glow. Beside it was a matching rocking chair, smooth as river stone beneath her fingertips. I was making these for you, Cole said, his voice steady but low. Not 'cause I thought you needed them now, but because I hoped one day you might. And if that day came, I wanted you to have something made by my hands, not bought from some store. Hannah ran her fingers over the carved edges, noticing small details. Tiny flowers etched into the crib's headboard, a delicate curve in the chair's arms. Cole, they're beautiful, she whispered. He nodded once, his eyes meeting hers. Hannah, I ain't much for speeches, and I don't have a ring to offer. All I got is my word, and my word is this. I want to stay here, not just to work. I want to stay because I want my life tied to yours. If you'll have me. Her breath caught, the barn suddenly feeling smaller, warmer. You're asking me to marry you? I reckon I am, he said with the faintest smile. Plain and simple. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. All the rumors, all the whispered warnings, all the shadowed truths. None of it mattered in this moment. Yes, she said, her voice breaking but sure. Yes, Cole, I'll have you. For a moment, neither moved. Then he stepped forward, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like the final piece of something she hadn't realized was missing. His hands were rough, but his touch was careful, steady, like he was holding more than just her, but the promise of everything to come. The days that followed were different. Word traveled fast in Dusty Creek, as it always did, and the news of Cole's proposal and Hannah's acceptance spread to the town like wildfire. At first, there were the usual sideways glances, the low murmurs when they walked into the general store together. But slowly, something shifted. Mrs. Harper, who'd once crossed the street to avoid passing Cole, stopped him in front of the post office to ask about repairing her barn roof. The blacksmith gave him a nod that actually carried respect. Even Jeb Turner, though still sour-faced, kept his distance. Hannah noticed it most in the little things. How people spoke to him now. How they didn't look past him, but at him. Cole didn't seem to seek their approval, but she could tell it meant something that the town was beginning to see him for who he was now, not for the man he used to be. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky a deep gold, they sat on the porch together. The crib and rocking chair were in the house now, waiting for a future that was still unwritten. Cole's hand rested over hers, warm and certain. "You ever think," she said softly, "how different things would be if you hadn't stopped here that day?" "Every day," he replied. "And every day I'm glad I did." The wind carried the scent of hay and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance a calf bawled for its mother. It was a simple sound, but it spoke of life, of days still to come. For Hannah, the future had once felt like a dry, empty road stretching too far to see. Now, sitting beside the man the town had once called a drifter, she saw it differently, not as a road, but as a home they were building together, one piece at a time. The weeks slipped by like wind over prairie. Life settled into a quiet rhythm on the ranch. Mending fences, feeding cattle, sharing coffee in the early light. The rumors in town had lost their sharp edges, replaced with nods and friendly greetings when Cole and Hannah rode in together. It was as if the whole place had finally decided he belonged. When Cole suggested a wedding, Hannah smiled and shook her head. "No church, no big fuss," she said. "Just us and the people who matter." He agreed without hesitation. Neither of them wanted a spectacle. They wanted something honest. The day came without grandeur, just a soft spring morning. Sunlight spilling over the hills. The ceremony was held right there on the ranch, in the open field where the grass rolled gently toward the horizon. A few friends stood in a loose circle. Mrs. Harper with a bundle of wildflowers, the blacksmith and his wife, old Sheriff Tate, even a couple of ranch hands from neighboring spreads. Hannah wore a simple cream dress that swayed in the breeze, and Cole stood tall in his cleanest shirt, the brim of his hat shadowing the quiet pride in his eyes. The words spoken were short, but they carried the weight of promises neither took lightly. When it was done, Cole kissed her, slow, certain, and warm enough to feel like the start of something that would last a lifetime. There was no applause, just the soft sound of wind and the murmur of friends smiling at the sight. Afterward, they gathered on the porch where the rocking chair sat in its place of honor. Hannah traced her fingers over its smooth arms, knowing that one day soon it might hold a new chapter of their lives. For now, it was simply a symbol of care, of hope, of the home they built together from nothing but trust and stubborn hearts. The celebration was modest, but filled with warmth. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a jug of cider, and before long, laughter and music spilled out across the ranch yard. Hannah danced barefoot in grass, her dress brushing against her calves, and Cole, a man once called a drifter, a loner, a danger, held her like she was the only thing that mattered in the whole wide world. They moved together under the open sky, the fading sun painting the horizon in shades of rose and gold. There was no crowd watching, no grandeur to impress. Just two people, hearts steady, eyes locked, moving in time to music older than either of them. As the evening deepened, lanterns were lit and the air grew cooler. The guests lingered, telling stories and sharing quiet smiles, but eventually they drifted home, leaving the ranch still and hushed again. Cole and Hannah stood together on the porch, the stars bright above, the rocking chair just behind them, waiting, patient as the land itself. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, they saddled their horses. It wasn't a honeymoon trip to some faraway place, just a ride across their own land, the place they'd chosen to build their future. The air was crisp, the earth damp with dew, and the sound of hooves echoed in the stillness. Cole reached over from his saddle, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together easily, as if they'd been made for it. They rode like that, hand in hand, side by side, across the hills, past the grazing cattle, toward the far fence line where the world seemed open wide and endless. Neither spoke for a long while. They didn't need to. The land stretched out before them, rich and quiet, and for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like a fight. It felt like a promise. The horizon lay ahead, golden in the morning light, and together they rode toward it, not as a drifter and a widow, but as partners, as a home, as two souls finally exactly where they belonged.